The Alpha King's wolves obeyed one law older than the kingdom itself. No paw touched food until the Luna had taken the first taste. For nearly 400 winters, not one wolf had broken that sacred custom. Then, on the coldest morning Frosthaven had seen in years, the oldest wolf in the kingdom walked away from a table covered in silver plates, ignored every royal command, crossed a hall filled with kings and nobles, and lowered his great silver head over a forgotten pot of simple vegetable broth prepared by a nameless kitchen girl. No one breathed. No one moved. Because the wolves of Frosthaven never made mistakes. If Ashfang had chosen her, then he had remembered something the kingdom itself had forgotten. And before the sun set that day, blood would stain the snow, ancient secrets would begin to awaken, and the quiet servant everyone overlooked would become the center of a destiny no crown could command. Winter ruled Frosthaven with a patient hand. The kingdom rested high among mountain peaks where the wind carried the scent of pine, cedar, and clean snow across valleys carved by rivers older than memory. Stone villages clung to cliff sides like stubborn birds' nests, their chimneys sending thin trails of smoke into pale morning skies. Every roof wore a blanket of white. Every path crunched beneath boots hardened by long winters. Bells echoed softly from distant watchtowers while ravens circled above forests that stretched beyond the horizon. People often said the mountains remembered every promise ever spoken within them. Perhaps that was why the wolves had never truly left. Long before Frosthaven had become a kingdom, before kings built walls of stone or raised banners over castle towers, wolves had guarded these mountains beside the first people who settled there. They hunted together, fought together, survived together. Stories changed with each generation. Legends became songs. Songs became whispers. Yet one truth endured. The Alpha King's wolves always chose truth over appearance. They recognized hearts long before they recognized faces. Most people repeated those words with pride. Few truly believed them anymore. Inside Frosthaven Castle, life began long before sunrise. Servants crossed icy courtyards carrying baskets of vegetables harvested from underground gardens. Bakers stirred heavy bowls of dough beside glowing ovens. Stable hands brushed frost from horses before the first light touched the eastern cliffs. Guards changed shifts beneath burning torches whose flames hissed each time snowflakes landed upon them. Far below the grand halls where nobles slept beneath velvet blankets, another world quietly awakened. The kitchens. Heat wrapped every corner of the enormous stone room. Copper pots reflected dancing firelight. Fresh bread filled the air with warmth that almost made people forget winter waited outside every door. The rhythm never changed. Knives chopped. Water boiled. Wood cracked inside roaring fireplaces. Orders echoed between cooks. Steam drifted toward the dark ceiling beams. Among dozens of servants moving with practiced speed, one young woman worked almost silently. Her name was Elara. She never rushed. She never complained. While others hurried to finish tasks as quickly as possible, she treated every carrot, herb, and loaf of bread with the same gentle care. Older servants often shook their heads. She cooks as though every meal is meant for someone she loves. Perhaps it was true. Elara had long ago stopped believing kindness needed a reason. She had seen what happened when people forgot it. Years earlier, before she could remember the sound of her mother's voice clearly, a winter raid had destroyed her village deep in the northern forests. People always spoke of that night in simple words. The wolves attacked. The village fell. Few survived. Stories rarely mention the hunger that had driven both wolves and humans toward desperation after months of endless storms. They never spoke of empty hunting grounds, frozen rivers, or children crying through the night because there was nothing left to eat. Hatred was easier to remember than hunger. Elara remembered both. She remembered hiding beneath broken floorboards while snow drifted through the roof. She remembered enormous shadows racing between burning homes. She remembered frightened eyes. Human eyes. Wolf eyes. Neither had looked victorious. Only terrified. She had never forgotten that. Perhaps that was why she refused to hate creatures everyone else feared. When she prepared soup for injured soldiers, She quietly set aside scraps for stray dogs wandering outside the castle gates. When birds gathered along frozen windowsills, she crumbled stale bread instead of chasing them away. Even mice found crumbs waiting near quiet corners after everyone else had gone home. Some servants laughed. Others whispered that she was foolish. The head cook called her weak. Master Garen ruled the royal kitchens with the discipline of a battlefield commander. He possessed enormous shoulders, a booming voice, and a beard permanently dusted with flour. His standards were impossible, his temper legendary. Every pan had its place. Every recipe followed ancient measurements. Every servant answered immediately, especially Elara. "You are peeling roots, not painting portraits," Garen barked one icy morning. His heavy boots crossed the kitchen floor with enough force to shake nearby tables. "You lose yourself inside every meal." Elara looked up from a basket of vegetables. A loose strand of chestnut hair had escaped beneath her linen scarf. Instead of answering quickly, she carefully finished slicing the final carrot before setting the knife aside. "I only wanted them all the same size. They disappear into stew. They still deserve care." Several cooks exchanged amused smiles. Garen sighed, so deeply his shoulders dropped. "You'll never understand royal kitchens." He walked away muttering beneath his breath. "You cook for feelings." The room burst into quiet laughter. Elara simply smiled to herself. She had heard worse, much worse. Outside the narrow kitchen window, dawn slowly painted the snowy mountains with soft gold. For a brief moment, everything looked peaceful. Then a shadow crossed the courtyard. Large, silent, graceful. The conversations inside the kitchen faded. Every servant instinctively turned. A wolf stood beyond the castle gate. Not an ordinary wolf. Even from across the courtyard, his size stole every wandering thought. His silver coat shimmered beneath morning light like frost covering ancient stone. Old scars crossed his shoulders beneath thick fur. One ear carried a long tear earned during battles no living soldier remembered. His amber eyes seemed almost human in their quiet understanding. Ashfang, guardian of the Alpha King. Oldest wolf in Frosthaven. No servant dared approach him. Most lowered their eyes whenever he passed. Ashfang rarely looked toward the kitchens. Yet recently something had changed. Every morning, almost without fail, he appeared outside the eastern courtyard. He stood perfectly still, breathing, waiting, watching. His gaze never wandered toward the royal halls, never toward the soldiers training beyond the walls. Always toward the kitchens, toward Elara. She noticed him only because she happened to carry fresh herbs to the windows each dawn. At first she thought coincidence had brought him there. Then another morning came. Then another. Nearly 2 weeks passed. Every sunrise, the same quiet visitor. He never growled, never barked, never approached. He simply stood beneath the snow-covered cedar tree outside the courtyard wall, as though listening to something only he could hear. One morning curiosity finally overcame caution. Elara finished placing herbs upon the wooden shelves before quietly opening the back kitchen door. Cold air rushed inside immediately. Snowflakes drifted across the stone floor. Several servants gasped. "What are you doing? He'll tear you apart." She barely heard them. Step by careful step, she walked into the courtyard. The wolf watched her. Neither moved. The wind stirred loose strands of her hair across her face. She stopped several yards away. Her heart beat quickly. Not because she expected violence, because she could not understand why such an ancient creature kept returning. Ashfang slowly lowered his enormous head. Not in surrender. Not in weakness. Simply acknowledgement. His nose lifted slightly into the air. He breathed deeply. Again. And again. His eyes closed for the briefest moment, as though recognizing a scent carried by memory rather than wind. Elara looked down at herself. She wore plain servant clothing. Her apron carried flour across one side. Fresh rosemary rested inside her pocket. Nothing unusual. "I'm afraid I don't have anything for you today," she whispered softly. The words disappeared into the winter air. Ashfang blinked once, then quietly turned away. His paws made almost no sound against fresh snow despite his massive size. Within seconds, he disappeared among drifting flakes beyond the castle wall. Only paw prints remained. The servants rushed outside the moment he vanished. "You've lost your mind. What if he attacked? That wolf belongs only to the Alpha King." One elderly baker frowned thoughtfully instead. He bowed. Everyone laughed. "Wolves don't bow." The old baker said nothing else, but his eyes remained fixed upon the fading tracks long after everyone returned indoors. From the second-floor balcony overlooking the eastern courtyard, another pair of eyes had witnessed everything. Lady Seraphine, the Luna of Frosthaven. Wrapped in white fur trimmed with silver embroidery, she stood motionless beneath carved stone pillars while a maid adjusted the edge of her cloak. Beautiful, elegant, perfect, at least from a distance. Closer inspection revealed something colder. Her smile never reached her eyes. Those eyes now remained fixed upon the young kitchen servant below. "Who is she?" A nearby attendant bowed immediately. "Elara, my lady, one of the lower kitchen girls." Seraphine continued watching the courtyard. "And Ashfang has visited before?" The attendant hesitated. "Several mornings. You neglected to tell me. We thought it meaningless." Seraphine's fingers tightened slightly around the stone railing. "In this castle." Her voice remained calm enough to chill the winter air. "Ashfang does nothing without meaning." Far below, unaware she had become the center of royal attention, Elara returned to her work. The kitchen welcomed her again with warmth, laughter, and the comforting smell of rising bread. She stirred great pots of vegetable soup meant for soldiers stationed along the northern walls. Steam fogged her face. Parsley floated across shimmering broth. She tasted one careful spoonful. Not enough thyme. A little salt. One crushed bay leaf. She smiled quietly after another taste. Better. Far better. Master Garen walked past carrying fresh game birds. He stopped unexpectedly beside her. "You always smile at soup." She looked slightly embarrassed. "I imagined someone cold finally warming their hands around the bowl." For reasons he couldn't explain, Garen looked away before answering. "Finish before midday." His voice sounded softer than usual. She nodded. As the day slowly unfolded, carts entered and left the castle carrying supplies for the coming winter gathering, Frosthaven's greatest celebration. Merchants arrived from distant kingdoms. Noble families filled guest chambers. Musicians unpacked polished instruments. Blacksmiths sharpened ceremonial swords. Every hallway buzzed with anticipation. Yet among all the noise, Ashfang appeared once more just before sunset. Again he stood outside the kitchen. Again he breathed deeply. Again those ancient amber eyes rested only upon Elara. This time, however, someone else watched him. Hidden beneath the shadows of the stable roof, a hooded servant hurried away before darkness fully settled across the castle. His footsteps led not toward the kitchens, but toward the private chambers of the Luna. Night settled gently over Frosthaven, wrapping the mountain kingdom beneath a blanket of silver moonlight and quiet snow. From the highest towers, torchlight shimmered across the frozen cliffs, while below, the great pine forests whispered beneath a restless wind. The castle itself never truly slept. Guards walked the walls in steady rhythm. Servants hurried through dim corridors with bundles of linen and baskets of food, and somewhere deep inside the royal kitchens, fresh bread continued to rise beside glowing ovens. Elara remained there long after most of the cooks had retired. She preferred these peaceful hours. Without shouting voices or clattering dishes, the kitchen seemed almost alive in a different way. Fire crackled softly beneath iron pots. Herbs hung drying from wooden beams overhead, filling the warm air with rosemary, sage, thyme, and mint. Outside, snowflakes drifted against the narrow windows like tiny feathers carried by the wind. She lifted the lid from a large stockpot. Steam rolled upward, carrying the comforting scent of onions, carrots, celery, wild mushrooms, and barley. It was only broth. Simple. Affordable. Nothing that would ever appear upon the Alpha King's table. Yet Elara prepared it with the same care she would have given the grandest feast. She skimmed away every trace of foam. She stirred slowly instead of hurriedly. Finally, she added a handful of finely chopped herbs gathered herself from the castle's sheltered winter garden. The fragrance changed immediately. Gentle.
Fresh. Warm.
It reminded her of a home she barely remembered. For a long moment, she simply stood there, breathing in the rising steam. Then she smiled. "That should ease old bones," she whispered. No one answered. Still, she filled one small wooden bowl. Not for herself. She wrapped the bowl inside a thick cloth to keep it warm and quietly slipped through the rear kitchen door. The night air bit at her cheeks the moment she stepped outside. Snow covered the courtyard untouched except for a single familiar trail of enormous paw prints leading toward the cedar tree. He was already waiting. Ashfang stood beneath the branches exactly as he had every evening for nearly a week. Moonlight flowed across his silver coat until he seemed carved from ice rather than flesh. The ancient wolf did not move as Elara approached. His amber eyes watched her carefully. Not with suspicion, with patience. She stopped several paces away and slowly knelt. "I hope this helps." Her voice barely rose above the whispering wind. She placed the wooden bowl upon the snow and stepped back. Ashfang lowered his massive head. Instead of eating immediately, he looked at her. For several heartbeats, neither of them moved. The silence felt strangely comfortable. Finally, the old wolf sniffed the broth. His ears relaxed. He took one careful taste. Then another. Within moments the bowl was empty. Not a single drop remained. Elara laughed quietly. "I'll take that as approval." Ashfang lifted his head once more. Something gentle flickered inside his ancient eyes. He stepped closer. Close enough that she could see countless tiny white hairs around his muzzle and the faded scars crossing his broad shoulders. She resisted the urge to reach toward him. Wild creatures deserved choice, not expectation. To her surprise, Ashfang closed the remaining distance himself. His enormous nose brushed lightly against the back of her hand. Just once. A quiet touch. Gone almost before it happened. The warmth lingering against her skin remained long after he disappeared once again into the moonlit forest. Hidden behind a stone pillar overlooking the courtyard, another servant stared in disbelief. Young Tomas had been sent to collect empty flour sacks. Instead, he had witnessed the impossible. Ashfang, the Alpha King's companion, had accepted food from a servant. Not only accepted it, he had shown affection. Tomas swallowed hard. By dawn, half the castle would know. Morning arrived beneath a pale gray sky. Snow continued falling in slow, steady sheets that softened every rooftop and tower. The castle buzzed with excitement. Only 3 days remained before the winter gathering. It was the most important celebration of the year. Every noble family from neighboring kingdoms had already begun arriving through the great eastern gates. Bright banners fluttered despite the cold. Carriages lined the outer courtyard. Musicians practiced inside the grand hall while servants polished silver until it reflected like still water. Master Garin stood in the center of the kitchens holding a long parchment. His expression alone silenced every conversation. "The royal feast," he announced. "No mistakes." He pointed toward different cooks. Roasted elk, river trout, honey pheasant, spiced lamb. Then his fingers settled upon Elara. "You'll prepare the vegetable broth." Several cooks exchanged puzzled glances. "For the feast?" one asked. Garin shook his head. "For the healers." He folded the parchment. Old bones complained during winter ceremonies. A ripple of laughter spread across the room. Elara simply nodded. She preferred broth anyway. As everyone hurried toward their assignments, 2 younger servants whispered nearby. "Did you hear? They say..." Ashfang visited again. "They say someone fed him." "Impossible." "They say it was her." Both glanced toward Elara. She pretended not to notice. Far above the kitchens, inside chambers lined with polished oak and wolf carvings, the Alpha King stood before a tall window overlooking Frosthaven. King Aldrich carried the strength of someone who had survived countless winters. Silver threaded through his dark hair. Scars crossed both hands. His broad shoulders still filled the heavy wolf fur cloak he wore, though lately an invisible weight seemed to press upon them. Behind him came familiar footsteps. Without turning, he spoke. "How is he today?" The royal healer lowered his head. "Weaker. Only one creature, required no name. Ashfang. He eats less each day. The stiffness grows worse. The old wounds trouble him." Aldrich remained silent. Beyond the window, he watched snow drift through the mountain air. "When we were boys," he said quietly, "he outran every horse in the kingdom." The healer smiled faintly. "I remember. He carried me through battles. He pulled wounded children from burning homes. He never once failed me." The king's voice grew softer. "And now I cannot even ease his pain." No answer came. Some grief belonged only to silence. Elsewhere inside the castle, Seraphine listened to a very different report. The hooded servant knelt before her. "My lady, it happened again." And the wolf accepted her food. Seraphine remained perfectly still. "What exactly did you see?" He touched her hand. For the first time, something sharp flashed across her face. Not fear, not surprise. Jealousy. Cold. Controlled. Dangerous. She dismissed the servant with a quiet wave. When the door closed, she walked alone toward her balcony. Snowflakes landed upon the polished railing. Ashfang. For years the ancient wolf had ignored everyone except the Alpha King. Even she, the Luna herself, had never earned such simple affection. Yet a kitchen servant accomplished it within days. Something was wrong. Or something had awakened. Either possibility threatened everything she had worked to build. The following evening, Elara prepared another bowl. She almost decided against it. Rumors spread quickly inside castles. Several servants had already begun avoiding her. Others stared whenever she entered a room. One woman quietly crossed herself whenever Elara walked past. Master Garen noticed. "So," he continued chopping herbs without looking at her, "you're becoming famous. I wish they would stop talking." "They won't," he shrugged. "People fear what they don't understand." She lowered her eyes. "I've done nothing." "I know." His knife paused briefly. Sometimes, he searched for the right words. "Doing nothing wrong is enough." That surprised her. It was perhaps the kindest sentence he had ever spoken. She smiled. "So, you don't think I've enchanted the royal wolf?" Garen snorted. "If you possessed magic." He looked around the kitchen. "I'd expect cleaner tables." She laughed. The sound filled the kitchen warmly before fading into the evening hush. Outside, snow covered Ashfang's paw prints almost as quickly as he made them. Tonight, he appeared slower. His powerful shoulders no longer carried the effortless grace of younger years. Each step seemed slightly heavier. When Elara offered the broth, he accepted it gratefully. But afterward, he did not leave. Instead, he lay down quietly beside the cedar tree. His breathing came deeper than before, almost tired. Concern settled across Elara's face. She cautiously knelt several feet away. "You've been hurting." Ashfang opened one eye. She noticed an old scar near his ribs, another across his front leg. One shoulder seemed stiff. "You've carried everyone for a very long time." The wolf rested his head upon the snow. She wished she knew how to help. Then an idea came. Returning briefly inside, she gathered dried willow bark, mountain mint, and a handful of healing herbs often used for aching joints. She simmered them into tomorrow's broth. Perhaps it would help. Perhaps it would not. But kindness asked no guarantee. High above the courtyard, hidden behind frost-covered glass, Seraphine watched every moment. Her lips tightened as Ashfang peacefully rested near the servant. No command had summoned him. No royal order held him there. He had chosen. And in Frosthaven, the choice of the Alpha King's wolf had changed kingdoms before. Seraphine turned away from the window. The winter gathering was now only 2 days away. If Ashfang embarrassed the throne before every visiting ruler, everything could unravel. She would not allow that, no matter the cost. Morning arrived beneath a sky the color of hammered steel. Snow had fallen through the night, burying the roads leading into Frosthaven until only the tallest pines and the watchtowers broke the endless blanket of white. Yet the storm did nothing to delay the winter gathering. Across the kingdom, bells rang from distant villages, their echoes drifting through the mountains like voices welcoming another turning of the seasons. By sunrise, the castle had become a world unto itself. Merchants rolled wagons through the eastern gate loaded with barrels of honey, smoked fish, winter apples, and fragrant herbs gathered from valleys far below. Noble families arrived beneath embroidered banners, their cloaks trimmed with fox fur and silver thread. Musicians tuned their lutes beneath vaulted ceilings while servants hurried through endless corridors balancing trays of polished goblets that glittered beneath candlelight. Every room seemed brighter than usual. Every voice carried excitement. Only Elara felt the quiet weight growing inside her chest. The whispers had changed. Where servants once greeted her with warm smiles, many now lowered their eyes. Some stepped aside without speaking. Others watched her from across the kitchens as though trying to discover something hidden beneath her plain linen apron. She understood why. Stories traveled faster than ravens inside castles. By now nearly everyone had heard that Ashfang accepted food from the young kitchen servant. No one understood it. That made it dangerous. Master Garen noticed the uneasy silence before anyone else. He slammed a heavy wooden spoon against the edge of a copper pot. The sharp crack echoed through the kitchen. "If you've time for gossip," he barked, "you've time to peel another 100 potatoes." Several servants immediately returned to work. The old cook glanced toward Elara only briefly. "You're with me today." She nodded. Together they moved through the organized chaos of the royal kitchens. Massive spits turned slowly over glowing fires where whole boars roasted until their skins shone golden brown. Huge cauldrons simmered with rich venison stew. Bakers carried fresh loaves from enormous stone ovens while the sweet scent of cinnamon, cloves, and honey drifted through the warm air. It was unlike anything Elara had seen. Every feast prepared before had been grand. This one felt historic. Master Garen unfolded a long parchment listing every royal course. The Alpha King's table receives 12 dishes. He pointed toward different stations. The nobles receive 8. The guards receive 4. The servants eat after sunset. Finally, his finger rested upon a smaller note near the bottom. "And your broth." Elara blinked. "My broth." The royal healers requested it. They said the old soldiers prefer something lighter before the ceremonies. He scratched his beard thoughtfully. "Make plenty." She smiled softly. "I will." Though the task seemed ordinary, she approached it with the same quiet devotion she always carried. She washed every carrot until the water ran perfectly clear. She trimmed each stalk of celery carefully. She sliced onions into thin, even crescents that melted slowly inside the pot instead of falling apart. Fresh parsley waited until the very end, not because tradition demanded it, because fresh herbs deserved to keep their fragrance. As the broth slowly began to simmer, a familiar warmth filled the room. Several nearby servants glanced toward the pot almost without realizing they had done so. One young baker smiled. "It smells like home." An older maid closed her eyes briefly. "My grandmother used to cook something like that." Even Master Garen paused for a heartbeat. He said nothing. Yet he quietly added another log beneath Elara's fire to keep the simmer perfectly steady. High above the kitchens, the great hall transformed into a palace worthy of legends. Long tables stretched almost the length of the chamber. Golden candle holders reflected hundreds of tiny flames. Pine branches woven with winter berries decorated stone pillars carved with wolves standing beside ancient kings. Above everything hung the banner of Frosthaven, a silver wolf beneath a full moon. King Aldrich walked slowly through the hall inspecting the final preparations. His advisors followed several steps behind. The oldest among them, Lord Cedric, leaned upon an oak cane polished smooth by decades of use. "The gathering grows larger every year." Aldrich nodded. "The mountains have known peace." Cedric studied the arriving nobles. Peace attracts many friends. And ambition. The king's gaze drifted toward the throne standing beneath the great banner. A kingdom must always remember the difference. Before Cedric could answer, distant howls echoed across the valley. Every conversation inside the hall paused. the Alpha King's wolves. One by one, great gray and white wolves emerged from the snowy forest surrounding the castle. Silent,
Disciplined.
magnificent. They crossed the courtyard without fear, watched respectfully by guards who lowered their spears as each animal passed. Children visiting with noble families rushed toward the windows in amazement. Even seasoned warriors smiled. 4 generations the royal pack had symbolized protection rather than terror. Yet among all those proud wolves, one was missing. Ashfang. The king noticed immediately. A quiet crease formed between his brows. He has not arrived. No, your majesty. Cedric looked toward the open courtyard. That is unlike him. Ashfang stood elsewhere. Not in the great hall. Not beside the throne. He waited beneath the familiar cedar outside the kitchens. Snow gathered gently across his broad shoulders. His breathing remained calm. His amber eyes rested upon one wooden door. When it finally opened, Elara stepped outside carrying fresh herbs. She smiled the instant she saw him. You came. Ashfang rose slowly. Today his movements seemed easier than before. The stiffness in his shoulders had eased slightly. Elara noticed immediately. The herbs helped. She laughed quietly. Or perhaps you're simply being kind enough to make me think they did. The wolf lowered his head. She carefully set down another bowl. Steam curled upward into the cold air. Ashfang drank more eagerly today. When he finished, he looked toward her with the same quiet understanding that continued to puzzle her. She wished she knew what he saw. Before she could wonder longer, distant horns sounded from the front of the castle. The first royal procession. Servants hurried across the courtyard carrying final supplies. Elara quickly gathered the empty bowl. I have to go. Ashfang remained where he was. Watching. Always watching. From the highest balcony overlooking the celebration, Seraphine observed everything. She wore a gown of white velvet embroidered with silver wools, its long train flowing behind her like fresh snow. To every visiting noble she appeared every inch the perfect Luna. Only those who knew her well recognized the tension hidden beneath her graceful posture. Her eyes followed Ashfang. Not once had the ancient wolf looked toward her. Not once. Instead, he watched a servant disappear into the kitchens. A servant. Seraphine's fingers tightened around the balcony railing. Lady Morel, a visiting duchess, approached with an easy smile. The stories are true, then. Seraphine turned smoothly. What stories? They say your Alpha King's oldest wolf has grown selective. A pleasant smile touched Seraphine's lips. Guests should be careful believing servant gossip. Of course. The duchess bowed politely. But gossip often begins with truth. She moved away before another word could be spoken. Seraphine's smile disappeared instantly. If foreign rulers noticed Ashfang's unusual behavior, questions would follow. Questions became rumors. Rumors weakened crowns. She would stop this before the feast began, no matter what sacrifice was required. As afternoon faded into evening, the castle glowed with thousands of candles. Outside, snow continued falling in soft silence. Inside, music filled the halls. Guests entered the great chamber, wearing jeweled cloaks and polished armor that reflected golden light. The Alpha King took his place beneath the great wolf banner. Seraphine sat beside him with perfect composure. Along the walls stood members of the royal pack, calm and alert. Finally, Ashfang entered. Every noble instinctively turned. The old wolf walked with slow dignity between rows of guests. Despite his age, his presence alone silenced the enormous hall. He crossed the polished stone floor until he reached his customary place beside the Alpha King's throne. Only then did King Aldrich allow himself a small breath of relief. He came, Cedric whispered. For now, the king answered quietly. Servants emerged carrying the first ceremonial dishes. Ancient tradition demanded complete silence. No fork.
No spoon.
No cup could be lifted until the Luna tasted the first meal.
Generations had honored that law.
Tonight would be no different, or so everyone believed. Seraphine accepted the beautifully carved silver spoon. She lifted it toward the steaming royal stew. Hundreds of eyes watched. Ashfang remained perfectly still. Then, One sharp breath escaped the ancient wolf. His ears lifted. His head turned not toward the throne, but toward the servants' corridor beyond the great hall, toward a place where no noble was looking, toward a quiet kitchen, where one forgotten pot of simple broth still rested beside a warm fire. And, before anyone understood what had caught his attention, Ashfang took his first deliberate step away from the Alpha King's table. The scrape of Ashfang's claws against polished stone echoed through the great hall with startling clarity. One step, then another. The ancient wolf did not hurry, nor did he hesitate. His broad shoulders rolled with the calm confidence of a creature that had never questioned his own instincts. Around him, nobles remained frozen in place, uncertain whether to stand, kneel, or simply watch. The ceremonial musicians lowered their instruments without being told. Even the roaring fireplaces seemed quieter, as if the castle itself were holding its breath. King Aldric's hand tightened around the carved arm of his throne. He had fought beside Ashfang for nearly 3 decades. He knew every signal, every movement, every subtle shift of the old wolf's ears and eyes. This was no act of confusion. Ashfang had made a choice. Seraphine slowly lowered the untouched silver spoon. Her graceful smile remained upon her face for the benefit of their guests, but beneath the table her fingers curled so tightly that the jeweled ring upon her hand dug into her skin. "Call him," whispered one of the royal elders. The king rose slowly. "Ashfang."
His voice was calm, firm.
The voice that had guided warriors through blizzards and battles alike. For the first time, in anyone's memory, Ashfang did not stop. Gasps rippled across the hall. The wolf continued toward the servants' passage, passing beneath towering banners embroidered with silver wolves and ancient runes. Guards instinctively stepped aside, unable to imagine placing themselves in his path. Beyond the carved archway lay a narrow corridor far less magnificent than the royal hall. The music faded behind thick stone walls. The rich sense of roasted venison and honey-glazed pheasant gave way to the familiar warmth of bread, herbs, and simmering vegetables. Inside the kitchens, no one yet knew what was happening. Master Garin barked instructions over the clatter of pans. "Move those trays. More bread to the western table. Careful with that gravy." Elara stood near the largest stove, gently stirring the final pot of broth prepared for the elderly healers and castle guards. Tiny flecks of parsley floated across its golden surface, while soft clouds of steam curled toward the rafters. She tasted a single spoonful. The flavor lingered for a moment. Then she added one last pinch of thyme. Perfect. A sudden silence spread through the kitchen. Not because anyone had given an order, because every servant had turned toward the doorway. Heavy footsteps approached. Measured.
Confident.
Master Garin frowned. "What now?" The answer appeared before anyone could speak. Ashfang stepped into the kitchen. Flour-covered apprentices nearly dropped their trays. One maid stumbled backward until she leaned against a stone pillar. Someone whispered a hurried prayer. The old wolf ignored them all. His amber eyes searched the room only briefly before finding Elara. She stood motionless beside the simmering broth. Their eyes met. A strange peace settled over her despite the frightened faces surrounding them. She had expected him eventually. Just not here.
Not today.
Not in the middle of the kingdom's greatest celebration. Ashfang crossed the kitchen floor. His paws made almost no sound despite his size. He stopped beside the stove. Steam drifted around his silver muzzle. Without looking toward anyone else, he lowered his great head over Elara's simple pot of broth. The scent of rosemary, barley, mushrooms, and fresh herbs filled the warm room. Elara barely breathed. Slowly, Ashfang drank. One long, grateful drink. Then another. The kitchen remained utterly silent except for the quiet sound of the wolf lapping the warm broth. Outside, hurried footsteps thundered through the corridor. The first nobles had followed. Then the guards. Then members of the royal court. Within moments the doorway filled with astonished faces. No one crossed the threshold. No one dared interrupt. King Aldric arrived last. His cloak swept across the stone floor as he entered the kitchen, his eyes fixed entirely upon his oldest companion. Ashfang finished the broth. For a heartbeat, he remained still. Then, before anyone could comprehend what would happen next, the ancient wolf turned toward Elara. The young servant instinctively lowered her gaze. I'm sorry if I've broken some rule, she whispered. Ashfang stepped closer. Every soldier in the doorway tensed. The distance between them disappeared. The wolf lowered his enormous head until it rested gently against Elara's shoulder. Not with force. Not with dominance. With trust. A soft murmur spread through the crowded corridor. Several elderly nobles stared with tears gathering in their eyes. One gray-haired council elder slowly sank to both knees. I've only read of this. Another elder followed. Then another. They remember. They truly remember. Confused whispers spread among the younger guests. What are they doing? What does it mean? An old woman wrapped in deep blue velvet answered without taking her eyes from Ashfang. The wolves of the First Age recognized hearts before crowns. Her voice trembled. It has not happened in centuries. Seraphine arrived just in time to hear those words. Her heartbeat pounded against her ribs.
No.
This could not happen. Not before every noble house in the northern kingdoms. She stepped gracefully into the kitchen, her expression perfectly composed. What a touching sight. Her gentle voice floated through the room like silk. But surely our honored guests are forgetting themselves. She looked toward Elara. A servant has interrupted a sacred ceremony. Several uncertain nobles immediately straightened. The reminder of protocol broke part of the spell. Seraphine continued. Whatever this appearance may suggest, ancient customs cannot be set aside because one old wolf wandered into a kitchen. Her words were calm, reasonable, almost comforting. Yet King Aldrich did not answer. He continued watching Ashfang. The old wolf had never once looked toward Seraphine. Instead, he remained beside Elara as though guarding something precious. Master Garens suddenly stepped forward. Every eye turned toward him. The proud old cook removed his flour-stained cap and bowed deeply before the throne. Your Majesty. His booming voice had grown unexpectedly quiet. I have served these kitchens for 31 winters. He swallowed. I have seen this girl prepare thousands of meals. He glanced toward Elara. She has never cooked for reward, never sought praise. If there is magic here, he looked once more at the steaming pot. It is only kindness. Silence followed. Not the uncomfortable silence of uncertainty, the thoughtful silence of people beginning to question everything they believed. King Aldrich slowly approached Elara. She immediately knelt. I'm sorry, Your Majesty. I never meant. You fed him. Yes. Why? She looked up, genuinely surprised by the question. He looked hungry. No speech. No clever explanation. Only the simple truth. The king searched her face for any sign of deception. He found none. Behind him, Ashfang quietly sat beside Elara, without being asked. His great tail rested upon the warm stone floor. The ancient guardian had made his choice before the entire kingdom. And outside the kitchen windows, unnoticed by everyone within, snow continued falling across Frosthaven. The mountains watched in silence, as though they, too, had been waiting for this forgotten moment to return. The silence inside the royal kitchen lingered long after Ashfang had lifted his head from the empty bowl. Outside, the feast waited. Inside, an entire kingdom seemed to have forgotten how to breathe. King Aldrich stood motionless, his eyes moving from the ancient wolf to the young servant kneeling before him. Elara kept her gaze lowered, her hands clasped tightly in front of her apron. She had never sought attention, and now every noble in Frosthaven stared at her as though she had stepped out of an old legend. At last, the king spoke. Rise. His voice was calm, carrying neither anger nor praise. Elara slowly stood. I ask only one question. She nodded nervously. When did this begin? She searched her memories before answering. Several mornings ago, Your Majesty. He came to the courtyard outside the kitchens. He never asked for anything. He only watched. One evening he seemed tired, so I brought him a bowl of broth. You knew he belonged to the crown. Yes. And you are not afraid? She hesitated. I was, at first. The corners of her lips softened with a faint smile. But he looked lonely before he looked dangerous. A quiet murmur spread among the elders. King Aldrich looked toward Ashfang. The old wolf remained seated beside Elara, his tail resting peacefully against the warm stone floor. For the first time in many weeks, his breathing sounded easier. The king noticed. So did everyone who had cared for the aging guardian. The royal healer stepped forward and slowly knelt beside Ashfang. He carefully placed one hand near the wolf's shoulder, where old wounds often left him stiff after cold nights. His brow furrowed. The swelling. He looked up in surprise. It's gone. Another healer examined Ashfang's front leg, where an ancient scar usually made each movement slow and painful. He should be limping. He isn't. Neither healer understood what they were seeing. The broth could not possibly heal old battle wounds. Yet, Ashfang stood taller than he had in months. Hope flickered across the king's face. Seraphine saw it, and that frightened her far more than the wolf's strange behavior. She stepped gracefully toward the throne. My king. Her voice remained gentle enough that none of the visiting nobles could hear accusation within it. This is certainly unusual. Aldrich remained silent. But unusual things deserve careful examination. She looked kindly toward Elara, especially when ancient customs are broken before every ruler in the northern kingdoms. Her smile never faded. No one suggests wrongdoing. Not yet. But surely everyone would agree that caution protects the crown. Several nobles slowly nodded. The words sounded reasonable, thoughtful, responsible. Seraphine continued before anyone else could answer. If whispers begin spreading beyond these walls that our royal wolf has abandoned sacred tradition, neighboring kingdoms may question whether Frosthaven still carries the blessing of the first pack. She turned toward the gathered guests. Our duty is not merely to seek wonder. It is to protect stability. The hall grew thoughtful once again. Hope began slipping beneath uncertainty. Exactly as Seraphine intended. King Aldrich studied her carefully. Then he looked back toward Elara. I will not condemn someone for showing kindness. Seraphine bowed respectfully. Nor would I ask you to. Her eyes drifted toward Ashfang. I ask only that we discover why this happened. The request sounded impossible to refuse. At the back of the crowded kitchen, an elderly voice quietly broke the silence. There was once an answer. Everyone turned. An old man wrapped in a weathered green cloak slowly stepped forward, leaning upon a polished walking staff carved from mountain ash. Deep lines crossed his face like rivers through stone, and silver hair fell almost to his shoulders. Many recognized him at once. Master Rowan, the kingdom's oldest herbalist. Few people remembered a time before he wandered Frosthaven's forests gathering rare plants for the royal healers. Even fewer remembered the stories he carried. Rowan bowed before the king. I beg forgiveness for speaking without invitation. You may speak, Aldrich replied. The old herbalist looked first at Ashfang, then at Elara. His weathered eyes softened. I have seen this once before. Every whisper stopped. Not in my lifetime. He smiled faintly, but in the journals of my grandfather. He slowly reached inside his cloak and withdrew a bundle of worn leather pages tied with faded cord. The Hearth Keepers. Several elderly council members exchanged startled glances. One whispered the forgotten name beneath his breath. Rowan nodded. They were neither queens nor warriors. They carried no crowns. They built no castles. They healed. He carefully unfolded one brittle page. The oldest wolves never chose them because of power. They chose them because fear could not live where compassion was freely given. The room remained completely still. Seraphine's expression barely changed. Only the slightest tightening around her eyes betrayed her concern. Rowan continued. The journals speak of women who crossed battlefields carrying bread instead of swords. They fed abandoned pups before feeding themselves. They entered forests where armies feared to walk. And the wolves remembered them. He looked toward Elara. They carried no magic. Only hearts that never measured kindness before giving it. A visiting duke scoffed quietly. Stories. Rowan smiled. Many truths become stories after enough generations forget them. King Aldrich stepped closer. You believe Ashfang remembers these Hearth Keepers? I believe wolves remember differently than we do. The old herbalist closed the journal. People remember names. Wolves remember hearts. Those words settled deeply inside the king. For years he had trusted Ashfang's instincts more than any counsel. Could the ancient guardian truly recognize something no human eye could see? Before Aldrich could ask another question, the great doors at the end of the corridor burst open. A young royal messenger rushed inside, breathless from running. Your Majesty, he dropped to one knee. Pardon the interruption. What is it? The Northern Watch reports strangers crossing Black Pine Pass. Several commanders frowned. No merchants were expected. They carry no banners. The messenger swallowed. Our scouts say they're armed. The festive warmth that had filled the castle only moments earlier disappeared. Aldrich's expression hardened. Double the watch. Yes, Your Majesty. The messenger hurried away. The king turned back toward the gathering. The feast will continue. His voice regained the steady authority that had carried Frosthaven through many winters. We will not allow rumors or uncertainty to rule this kingdom. The nobles slowly returned toward the great hall. Conversations resumed, though quieter than before. Everywhere Elara looked, people glanced back at her. Some with curiosity, some with admiration, others with fear. She wished she could disappear into the kitchens again. Master Garin quietly placed a reassuring hand upon her shoulder. Finish your work. His voice was softer than she had ever heard. The soup still needs serving. She nodded gratefully. As the crowds dispersed, Rowan approached her alone. Without speaking, he placed the old leather journal into her hands. I believe. He paused, as though listening to a memory carried by the wind. You may soon need this more than I do. Elara looked down at the worn pages. The faded symbol pressed into the leather caught her attention. It matched a small carving she had often seen on the pendant hanging around her neck, the only possession left from her parents. Before she could ask how he recognized it, Rowan's eyes suddenly widened. His gaze shifted toward a shadow moving high above the castle balcony. A hooded figure stood there only for an instant before disappearing into the darkness. The old herbalist's warm expression vanished. For the first time that evening, genuine fear crossed his face. They know, he whispered. Elara looked up, confused. Who? But Rowan did not answer. He simply stared toward the empty balcony, his hands trembling around his walking staff as snow continued to fall beyond the castle walls. Somewhere in the darkness, unseen eyes had already begun hunting the last forgotten secret of the Hearth Keepers. The sanctuary falls silent after the hunters surround the hidden valley, their boots crushing untouched snow as they close in from every side. Moonlight spills across broken pillars wrapped in ancient cedar roots, casting long shadows that seem to breathe with the wind. Elara stands before the weathered altar, the journal clutched tightly against her chest, while Ashfang positions himself between her and the advancing soldiers. His low growl rolls through the valley, not wild with rage, but filled with quiet warning. The hunters hesitate. Every one of them has heard the legends of the Alpha King's oldest companion, yet the promise of reward and the fear of the Luna's punishment drives them forward. Their leader, a scarred warrior named Varek, steps into the clearing with measured confidence. Draped over his shoulders is the black wolfskin cloak of the exiled northern warlord, a symbol feared along the mountain borders. He offers Elara a final chance to surrender the journal and the pendant, claiming the kingdom has no place for forgotten bloodlines that threaten the throne. Elara says nothing. Her trembling fingers tighten around the worn leather book, while Ashfang's amber eyes never leave the hunter's face. The valley hangs between peace and violence, balanced on a single heartbeat. The first arrow flies without warning. Ashfang lunges. The shaft glances off an ancient stone pillar, shattering against the rock instead of striking its target. Chaos erupts. Hunters rush forward through drifting snow while Ashfang moves with surprising speed despite his age, weaving between the fallen columns and forcing the attackers backward without taking a single life. Elara ducks behind the altar as steel clashes against stone, her pulse echoing louder than the battle around her. She remembers Rowan's words. The Hearth Keepers were guardians of life, never bringers of death. That truth steadies her even as fear threatens to overwhelm her. Searching desperately for another way, Elara notices several frightened wolves chained near the hunter's camp at the edge of the clearing. Their ribs press against their thin coats, their eyes clouded not with savagery but with exhaustion and hunger. They have been starved, beaten, and forced into obedience. The sight tears at her heart. Ignoring the danger, she slips through the confusion carrying the satchel she packed before leaving the castle. Inside are loaves of bread, dried herbs, and the last of the warm broth sealed inside a small iron flask. One hunter spots her and gives chase, but Ashfang intercepts him, knocking the man's weapon into the snow. Elara reaches the chained wolves. Instead of recoiling, they shrink away, expecting another blow. Kneeling slowly, she pours the broth into a wooden bowl and slides it toward the weakest among them. At first, the animal refuses to move. Then the familiar scent of herbs fills the freezing air. The wolf inches forward, drinks cautiously, and finally lifts its eyes toward her. The fear inside them begins to soften. One by one, the others follow. The clearing grows strangely quiet. Even Varric lowers his sword as he watches wolves bred for violence gather peacefully around the kneeling young woman. They do not bare their teeth. They do not attack. They simply eat, their trembling bodies slowly relaxing as warmth replaces desperation. Several hunters exchange uneasy glances. For years they had been told kindness was weakness, that only cruelty could command wolves. What they witness now challenges everything they believed. Ashfang walks slowly to Elara's side. Without a sound, the ancient guardian lowers his head beside the rescued wolves. The gesture is unmistakable. He accepts them as part of the pack. The chained animals respond by bowing their heads in return, not to dominance, but to trust freely given. Across the sanctuary, the old carvings seem almost alive in the moonlight, echoing scenes carved centuries earlier of humans and wolves sharing the same fire. Varric senses the moment slipping away. Driven by desperation, he reaches beneath his cloak and produces a dark iron horn etched with twisted runes, the mark of the exiled warlord's forbidden rituals. He blows a single harsh note. The sound tears through the valley like a winter storm. Far beyond the trees, answering howls rise from the darkness. They are deeper, harsher, filled with unnatural fury. Ashfang's ears flatten. The rescued wolves whimper. Even the wind seems to retreat. From the forest emerge larger wolves, their eyes glowing with unnatural crimson, their movements stiff as though driven by pain instead of instinct. Around their necks hang iron collars engraved with the same black runes carved into Varric's horn. They're no longer fighting because they choose to. They have become prisoners inside their own bodies. Elara realizes the sanctuary has revealed only the beginning of a far greater threat. Somewhere beyond the northern mountains, someone has learned how to break the sacred bond between wolves and humans, and if that darkness reaches Frosthaven, no kingdom, no throne, and no ancient tradition will remain untouched. As the corrupted pack advances through the snow beneath the rising blood moon, Ashfang steps forward once more, standing alone between the approaching darkness and the young woman who now carries the last hope of the Hearth Keepers. The true battle for Frosthaven has finally begun. The blood moon rose slowly above Frosthaven, bathing the snow-covered mountains in a crimson glow that seemed to awaken every ancient fear buried beneath the kingdom's stones. The wind carried distant howls through the cedar forest, but these were not the proud voices of a free pack. They were broken cries, filled with pain and obedience forced by the dark iron collars that bound the wolves to another master's will. Ashfang stood at the edge of the sanctuary, his silver coat shining against the red light, while Elara tightened her grip on Rowan's journal. She understood now that the Hearth Keepers had never been chosen to command wolves. They had been chosen to remind them who they truly were. The corrupted pack surrounded the ancient ruins with slow, deliberate steps. Their glowing crimson eyes remained fixed on Ashfang, yet beneath the unnatural light, Elara caught brief flashes of fear. These wolves were prisoners trapped inside their own bodies. Every growl sounded strained, as though another voice fought to escape. The sight filled her with sorrow rather than hatred. Rowan's words echoed through her heart. Fear could never heal fear. If these creatures were ever to be saved, someone had to reach the part of them the darkness had not yet destroyed. Varric raised the black horn once more, its twisted runes pulsing like embers beneath ash. Before he could sound another command, Ashfang lunged with astonishing speed. The ancient guardian struck the hunter squarely across the chest, sending the horn spinning through the air before it crashed against a broken pillar. The impact cracked the ancient instrument, releasing a harsh, echoing cry that rolled across the valley. Several corrupted wolves staggered, as if waking from a terrible dream. Their movements faltered, and for a single precious moment, confusion replaced blind obedience. Elara seized the opportunity. She hurried toward the shattered altar, where a shallow stone basin rested beneath centuries of snow. The journal spoke of a ceremonial meal once shared between humans and wolves during times of war, a simple offering meant to restore trust before words could be spoken. Working quickly, she mixed the last of her broth with fresh spring water flowing beneath the sanctuary, adding healing herbs from her satchel. The warm fragrance drifted across the clearing, cutting through the bitter scent of blood and iron. Ashfang lifted his head immediately. So did several of the corrupted wolves. One young wolf, smaller than the others, broke formation. Its crimson eyes flickered between rage and confusion as it slowly approached the basin. Every hunter shouted for it to return, but the animal ignored them. Trembling violently, it lowered its muzzle toward the broth. The first sip seemed to shake its entire body. The glowing red slowly faded from its eyes until they revealed a deep amber hidden beneath the curse. The iron collar around its neck cracked with a sharp metallic snap before falling into the snow. A long, mournful howl rose into the night, not one of anger, but of freedom. The miracle spread uncertainty through both sides of the battlefield. Several hunters lowered their weapons, unable to deny what they had witnessed. Even Varric stepped backward, his confidence beginning to crumble. He had been taught that the collars created perfect obedience. Now one had shattered before his eyes, through nothing more than compassion. But far beyond the sanctuary, another presence felt the collar break. Deep within the frozen north, the exiled warlord sensed the weakening of his dark ritual. Beside him stood a cloaked woman whose face remained hidden beneath a silver hood. Her quiet voice carried only one command: bring me the Hearth Keeper alive. Back at Frosthaven, King Aldrich could no longer ignore the growing danger beyond his walls. Scouts returned through the blizzard with troubling reports of abandoned villages, frightened refugees, and wolf packs behaving unlike anything the kingdom had seen before. As the council argued over armies and defenses, the king remembered Ashfang's unwavering faith in the young kitchen servant. He ordered his finest riders to ride into the northern forests, not to capture Elara, but to find her before those hunting her did. His decision divided the council, and Seraphine hid her anger behind calm agreement while secretly sending her own loyal followers along a different path. As dawn's first light touched the sanctuary, the surviving hunters retreated into the forest, carrying word of their failure to their mysterious master. The corrupted wolves that remained behind no longer formed a single pack. Some fled into the mountains, freed from the collar's influence, while others remained too wounded in body and spirit to travel. Elara stayed with them, tending cuts, wrapping injured paws, and sharing what little food she had left. Watching her move from one frightened animal to another, Ashfang rested quietly beside the ancient altar. For the first time since entering the valley, the old guardian looked peaceful. Then the sanctuary itself responded. The stone beneath the altar trembled softly. Cracks spread across its weathered surface, revealing a hidden chamber sealed for centuries beneath the roots of the great cedars. As dust drifted into the morning air, a staircase slowly emerged, descending into darkness where faint blue light shimmered below. Carved above the entrance were words almost erased by time. When kindness is chosen over fear, the path shall open once more. Elara looked toward Ashfang. The ancient wolf met her gaze, then quietly stepped toward the hidden passage. Whatever the Hearth Keepers had protected for generations had been waiting for this very moment, and the greatest secret of Frosthaven was finally ready to be uncovered. The hidden staircase descended deep beneath the roots of the ancient cedars, where the warmth of the earth slowly replaced the sharp bite of winter. Blue crystals embedded within the stone walls glowed with a gentle light, revealing carvings untouched by time. They did not depict kings claiming victory or warriors standing over fallen enemies. Instead, they showed simple moments: a child offering bread to a frightened wolf, a wounded traveler sharing a fire with strangers, and men laying down their weapons while wolves rested peacefully beside them. Elara traced her fingertips across the worn stone, realizing that the greatest stories of the Hearth Keepers had never been written through battles, but through quiet acts of mercy that changed hearts long after swords had been forgotten. Ashfang walked ahead with calm certainty, his silver paws making almost no sound against the ancient floor. Though the old wolf had never entered this chamber in Elara's lifetime, he moved as if guided by memories older than his own years. At the center of the underground sanctuary stood a circular hall crowned by a crystal dome through which faint daylight filtered from the forest above. In the middle rested a stone table surrounded by 12 empty seats, each carved with the symbol of a different mountain pack. Upon the table lay a single wooden bowl, untouched by dust despite the passing centuries, and beside it rested another weathered journal sealed with the same emblem engraved on Elara's pendant. With trembling hands, she opened the journal. The final writings of the last Hearth Keeper filled its pages. They told of an age when peace between wolves and humans had nearly collapsed beneath the ambition of rulers who believed fear created stronger kingdoms than trust. Unable to defeat the united packs through open war, those rulers forged cursed iron collars capable of twisting a wolf's instincts into blind obedience. The Hearth Keepers sacrificed everything to destroy the first collars and hide the knowledge before it could spread. Yet they feared that one day someone would rediscover the forgotten craft. Their final message ended with a warning: if darkness ever returned, only a heart that refused hatred could restore what force had broken. As Elara finished reading, footsteps echoed from the staircase. King Aldrich emerged with a small group of loyal guards, their armor marked by frost from riding through the storm without rest. The moment Ashfang saw his king, the old wolf crossed the chamber and gently pressed his forehead against Aldrich's shoulder. The king closed his eyes, relief washing over his weathered face. He had feared he would find only ruins. Instead, he found his oldest companion standing beside the woman who had awakened a forgotten legacy. Before anyone could speak further, another sound rolled through the chamber.
Slow.
Measured. Confident. Seraphine descended the staircase with Varek and a company of armed followers at her back. Gone was the gentle mask she had worn before the court. Her calm smile had vanished, replaced by the cold certainty of someone who had hidden her true purpose for many years. She admitted what no one had imagined. Long before becoming Luna, she had sought the forbidden knowledge of the iron collars, believing peace built on trust was fragile while obedience could never fail. She had secretly allied herself with the exiled northern warlord, promising him Frosthaven in exchange for absolute control over every royal wolf. Ashfang's refusal to obey tradition had shattered her carefully built plans. Elara had become dangerous not because of who she was, but because she reminded wolves of a freedom Seraphine could never control. Varek stepped forward carrying a newly forged collar blacker than the winter night. He intended to place it upon Ashfang himself. The chamber tensed as soldiers drew their blades, but before steel could meet steel, Elara walked quietly between them. She carried only the simple wooden bowl from the stone table. Drawing clear spring water from the sanctuary and mixing it with the last herbs remaining in her satchel, she prepared one final broth. Its fragrance spread through the chamber, familiar and comforting, carrying memories of warm kitchens, quiet evenings, and countless unnoticed acts of kindness. Ashfang approached first, touching the bowl with his nose before stepping aside. Then something remarkable happened. One by one, the royal wolves gathered around Elara instead of their rulers. Even wolves wearing cursed collars hesitated, their fierce expressions softening as forgotten memories stirred beneath the darkness. The bond the Hearth Keepers had protected was awakening once again, not through magic, but through trust freely given. Seraphine, refusing to surrender, ordered Varek to sound the black horn. He raised it. No sound came. The cracked instrument, damaged during the battle at the sanctuary, finally split apart in his hands. The curse binding the wolves weakened in an instant. Iron collars shattered across the chamber, falling harmlessly onto the stone floor. The freed wolves turned away from fear, not toward revenge, toward one another. Varek dropped his weapon, understanding that everything he had believed had collapsed before his eyes. Many of Seraphine's own followers lowered their swords as well, unable to continue fighting after witnessing the impossible. King Aldrich stepped forward. "There will be justice," he said, his voice filling the ancient hall, "but it will not be built upon the cruelty that brought us here." Seraphine was taken into custody to answer for her betrayal before the council she had sought to deceive. Varek accepted responsibility for his crimes and agreed to reveal everything he knew about the Northern Warlord and the Cursed Collars, hoping that some small measure of truth might begin repairing the harm he had helped create. When the first light of morning reached the sanctuary, Elara, Ashfang, and King Aldrich climbed back into the quiet forest. Snow sparkled beneath the rising sun, and the mountains seemed brighter than they had in many winters. In the months that followed, Frosthaven slowly healed. The Hearth Keepers were restored not as nobles or rulers, but as humble guardians whose kitchens welcomed travelers, soldiers, children, and wolves alike. Every royal feast began with a simple bowl of broth shared before any grand banquet, reminding the kingdom that strength without compassion could never endure. Ashfang grew older still, but the weariness that had once clouded his eyes was gone. He often rested beneath the same cedar outside the castle kitchens, where the scent of fresh herbs drifted through the morning air. There he would watch Elara preparing meals with the same quiet care she had always shown, long before anyone knew her name. People traveled from distant kingdoms to hear the story of the kitchen girl who changed the fate of Frosthaven. Most expected tales of powerful magic. Instead, they found a lesson far simpler. The greatest bonds are never forged through fear. They are earned, one humble act of kindness at a time.